Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I have a gentleman who I actually was recommended to me. I was sent a video and I was just kind of sold and I wanted to have him on. So this is Mr. Chesa Boudin. And he is running for in San Francisco, the district attorney. So please welcome him. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, I watched some of your videos and I'm just blown away because your personal story is very inspiring, and it's always fascinating when people grow up a certain way and then go into that profession, lack of a better term. So do you want to share your story about your parents?
Sure. Well, when I was in diapers, under 2 years old, 14 months, my parents dropped me at the babysitter, and they never came back. My parents participated in a tragic armed robbery that day. They were driving a getaway car, and the people who did the robbery ended up killing a security guard and two police officers. I had no idea what was happening. I couldn't even talk. But my life was irrevocably and inexorably changed as a result of the horrible crime that my parents participated in that day. Now, as a result, my mother was sentenced to prison. She ended up serving 22 years. My father was given a 75-year minimum sentence, and he is still incarcerated today. He may never get out.
And what was the difference if they were both just drivers? Why the difference in sentence?
Well, it's one of the things that, for better or worse, is a reality in our criminal justice system. There are often really disparate outcomes for people who do basically the same thing. Often it's driven by race or socioeconomic status. In my parents' case, it was a little bit different. It was that my dad went to trial and chose to defend himself. He lost at trial, and the judge gave him the maximum possible sentence. My mother had a lawyer who negotiated a plea deal for her. She pled guilty, and the judge gave her a much lighter sentence.
I see. Yeah, that's incredible that you're so open about that. So what made you decide to get into law then?
Well, I had a long history of lawyers in my family. My uncle's a judge. My grandfather litigated in front of the Supreme Court. My adoptive mother, who raised me after my parents were arrested, was a lawyer. And many other people who I grew up admiring and seeing as role models had used the law as a tool for social change and to make the country a place that's more consistent with our values. So I was thinking about law really since before I can remember as at least a possible career path. But, I'm sure that visiting prisons my whole life and seeing how badly broken our criminal justice system is and how much it fails to meet the needs of victims of crime and how much it fails to rehabilitate people or to protect children like me from the trauma of parental incarceration is a big part of why I went to law school, became a lawyer, and became a public defender. And it's why I'm running for district attorney today.
Awesome. Do you think we can call it criminal justice system?
A lot of my friends call it the criminal legal system instead of the criminal justice system. I'm committed to putting the justice back in the system. I think right now we have a long way to go before we can really call it a justice system. The justice system that I imagine, that I'm committed to making a reality in San Francisco, is one where the outcome of your case doesn't depend on the color of your skin or the zip code you live in or how much money you have in your bank account or even what your job title is or whether you wear a uniform to work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm listening to a podcast called Actual Innocence, and it's just people telling their stories about being locked up and then proven innocent after like 20 years and such. And it's just like giving me a whole new perspective. So as far as what you want to accomplish, should you be elected tomorrow, what is the first thing you want to put on the table?
Well, I've been fighting for years to end money bail. I believe freedom should be free. I believe that our country's commitment since independence to liberty as a fundamental right and the presumption of innocence as a principle built into our Constitution are really, really important to defend. And I don't think we're doing it today. I think it's imperative that we not use money bail because it's discriminatory and it makes us less safe. So on day one, I'm committed to prohibiting everyone in my office from ever putting a price tag on freedom. The other thing I want to do on day one is I want to give every victim of every crime in San Francisco the right to participate in a restorative justice process if they choose to do so.
And what does that entail?
Restorative justice is an approach to justice that focuses on healing and that focuses on empowering victims to have a voice in what we do to hold people who cause harm accountable. All too often in the current system, what we do basically is we conflate victims' rights with length of sentence and conviction rates, and we teach people who've been harmed by crime that they're supposed to be satisfied with vengeance and retribution. I know from my own experience that I was angry at my parents. I was hurt by what they did to me and to others. And I know from getting to know and building a relationship with some of the victims of my parents' crime that sending my parents away to prison for life doesn't actually meet the real needs that victims have. Victims of crime have different needs depending on the crime, but fundamentally, it should be up to the victim to have a voice in figuring out how we hold the people who harm them accountable. So if someone spray paints your fence, it's really important that they paint your fence back the way it was. If someone breaks your window, it's important they fix your window. Right now, the criminal justice system doesn't allow for that. It doesn't promote it. It doesn't facilitate it. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that every victim of every crime has a voice in saying, this is what I need to feel safe. This is what I need from the system to restore me to where I was before the crime. And this isn't just about empowering victims. This is about holding people who cause harm in our community accountable. It's so much harder to look someone in the eye who you've done wrong and apologize, and then ask them what you can do to make it right and to do that apology, to act out that apology, to live that apology, than it is to passively spend days, months, or years behind bars.
Absolutely. No, I know Bernie Sanders came out with legislation to end cash bail. At this point, as far as the last I checked, he's the only presidential candidate who's on board. Do you see any negatives about getting rid of cash bail?
It's bad for rich people who are dangerous. It's bad for people like Mr. Epstein, who wants to be able to put up a private jet in a Caribbean island to be able to get his freedom. It creates this horrific double standard where people who are wealthy but dangerous can buy their way out, and people who are poor and have no evidence against them languish behind bars. So I don't see a downside. I think the real question is what we replace it with, and there are certainly risks to lots of the proposed alternatives that could replace money bail. And with any policy reform, we have to be mindful that the fix could be worse than the problem.
Right, absolutely. I always think of Sandra Bland. If she had those few dollars, she'd still be alive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it causes people to commit suicide. It causes people to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. It causes people to get exposed to sexual violence and physical assault while in jail. And it's unacceptable. It has nothing to do with public safety and everything to do with discrimination and exploitation of the poor.
Right. And then sometimes, people do end up staying months because they can't afford bail, and then they're found not guilty after that. So
yeah, I did a jury trial not too long ago where my client was an older man in the 70s. He was arrested. The judge put $650,000 bail. There was no way he could afford that bail. And after 6 months of waiting in jail, a jury found him not guilty of all charges. But by that point, I mean, his housing, his job, his entire life was thrown into turmoil.
Wow, that's incredible. What is one of your cases that really changed you?
I had a case a few years ago where I represented a young African-American man, and he was charged with stealing a car. He'd done it before, and there was a police report that made it seem like it was him. He was arrested in the stolen car. He was pointed out by a witness who said, that's the person that did it. And when I went to talk to him for our initial interview, he didn't say to me, I'm innocent, or I didn't do it. He said to me, I need to get out to go back to my family. I need to go home. Now, I've heard that, of course, from many of my clients over the years. But what this man said was, I will plead guilty to a more serious charge. I'll plead guilty to a strike, he said, even though car theft is not a strike. And so I said to him, you can't do that. You're not charged with a strike. You can't plead guilty to that. And luckily, my investigator found a video of the car being stolen. And what that video showed was that it wasn't this young man who had done it. It was a woman who had stolen the car.
Wow.
But what that case and that conversation taught me was how broken our system is and how much it teaches young people, especially people of color, not to trust the system to redeem you if you're innocent, not to trust the process to work things out and show that you're innocent through court cases or through litigation. People like this young man have learned through life experience that if you get arrested by the police, it doesn't matter if you're innocent or guilty. The way you get out of jail is to plead guilty as quickly as possible to a crime that's as serious as possible. That's a terrible, terrible lesson for young people to learn. And it's something that I think speaks to why so many folks in the field call it the criminal legal system instead of the criminal justice system.
Right, absolutely. My friend Joshua asked, who watches The Watchmen? Today we got really awful news.
We did.
Our biggest fear, basically, not a damn thing is going to happen to the people who murdered Eric Garner. It was murder. I mean, plain and simple, it was murder. And there's going to be no ramifications. I saw your post about your feelings on it. I know my heart just sunk when I saw it. What does that do to you as someone in law to see such grave injustice?
It's sad. It's really sad for the family. It's sad, and of course, no criminal charges, no prosecution is going to bring him back. But when we treat people who wear a badge with this double standard, when we allow them to get away with murder, it does two really, really damaging things to our society and to our legal system. One is it undermines the trust between the public and law enforcement. It makes people unwilling to cooperate, to come forward, to ask for help, to testify in court. And that makes all of us less safe. But the other thing it does is it sends a message to police. To the bad police, it says, you can get away with murder. Do whatever you want. Nobody will ever hold you accountable. And to the good, honest police officers who are serving with integrity, who are doing a difficult job under difficult circumstances, it says to them, don't you dare speak out against corruption and crime amongst your ranks, because nothing will happen and you'll be retaliated against for doing it. It's tremendously demoralizing to officers. And I've had many officers reach out to me and say, thank you for your commitment to holding police accountable. That's what we need to restore the dignity and the integrity and the trust in our department. And as long as police are allowed to get away with lying, allowed to get away with stealing, allowed to get away with murder, even if it's just a few bad apples, it does so much damage to the morale and the integrity of the entire department.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen it time and time again. We have videos of this happening. We have video of, crimes being committed, and these Black men, unarmed, are getting murdered, and these police are not being held accountable. They're not losing their jobs. They're getting suspended with pay, with benefits, all these things. And it's demoralizing. It's disheartening. What can, say myself as someone who's completely as white as it gets, what can I do? What besides post articles and speak out? What can I do to, ensure that I'm doing everything I can so these things don't keep happening?
So I think you can do a number of things. I mean, one is, as you said, write articles, speak out, be part of the public forum, talking about these issues, shaping public opinion about these issues. You're already doing that, and I'd encourage everyone to use their voice, when, whether it's through social media or traditional media or simply amongst your family and friends. Another thing you can do is use your cell phone to video things you see on the street. Make sure you're documenting what happens so that people know the day-to-day interactions between folks that don't look like you and I and police officers. That helps to, I think, redefine and reshape the way that police treat people of color. And then the other thing you can do, which is really critical, and it relates to what I'm doing this year and running for district attorney, is you can help elect progressive prosecutors. One of the endorsements that I'm most proud of is Sean King and the Real Justice Pact. And Sean King speaks so eloquently about how he came to do the work he's doing. And, he saw young people of color getting killed by police. And he started organizing and he started working with the families of those who've been killed and saying to them, don't worry, justice will be served. And then he saw time and time again, as we just saw today with Eric Garner, that prosecutors were unwilling to hold police to the same standards that everyone else is held to. And what Sean realized, and what he speaks about so eloquently, is that in order to have equal enforcement of the law, we need district attorneys who share our values and who have the courage and the independence to file criminal charges when police violate the law. That's why I'm running for district attorney. It's something you can do, and we all can do, is we can support candidates who are committed to equal justice. I'd love it if you'd get involved in my campaign, sign up to volunteer, repost our social media, donate to the campaign, and find other ways to get involved, not just during the campaign, but after I win. After your local district attorney elections are over, stay involved. Keep the pressure on to make sure that people who are elected enforce the law equally.
Absolutely. I'm in Pennsylvania. I love me some Larry. And when I found out Larry Krasner, if you guys are watching, I don't know if you guys know who he is. A lot of people across the country know who he is because he's just incredible and he's changed our state. Have you met him prior? Is that how you got an endorsement?
Yeah, I did meet Larry. I was in Philadelphia about a month ago, and I was speaking at a fundraiser, and Larry kind of made a surprise appearance, came, spoke at the fundraiser, endorsed me. It was really an honor to meet him and have his support. And then actually this past Saturday, I was speaking at a conference, Netroots Nation, in Philadelphia.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I was there with Larry and Tiffany Caban and Rachel Rollins and Robin Steinberg and a number of other people who were really active and on the front lines of bail reform work and the progressive prosecutor movement. So yeah, I know it's a difficult road, and if we've learned anything from Larry and Rachel and others, it's that it is not easy to do this work, even once you're elected. And that's why it's so important that people who share our values don't just vote and donate and then sit back and watch the show, but stay involved. Continue to keep political pressure on elected district attorneys to do the right thing in these difficult cases.
Absolutely. One of the things that's incredible about Krasner is he's not let's say he's Caucasian, but he's done a lot for people of color, which is really awesome. It sets a good example and it shows us we can actually do more than we're doing. If you met with Tiffany, what the hell is going on with her race? Do you know?
I know they're fighting to make sure that every vote gets counted, and I know that if every vote gets counted, Tiffany is going to win on election night. But of course, the system works the way it does today for a reason, and that's a lot of very powerful, very wealthy people are very happy with the status quo, and someone like Tiffany, someone like me, someone like Larry, challenges the status quo, and there are powerful forces lined up against Tiffany in Queens, and they're going to do whatever they can to exclude votes that were cast in her favor. So it's a fight. People are donating to her campaign. They've got lawyers working on her campaign in order to ensure that every vote is counted, and the will of the voters will triumph.
Absolutely. Gives me flashbacks to 2016 for sure.
Yeah, and 2000 in Florida, the hanging. Yeah. I mean, how George Bush stole the election there.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of 2016, you have wholeheartedly endorsed Mr. Sanders again.
I love Bernie. I'm excited about a couple other candidates too, but I am very excited about Bernie's platform and the momentum that he has. I'm so excited to see him on the right side of criminal justice issues that I care about. I think he's one of the people leading the charge on that issue and many other issues that are so important in this moment in American history. And, I think certainly when you compare him to many of the other candidates who are former prosecutors, he's someone whose values I trust.
So being you are in California, let's just touch on that. um, a former prosecutor, let's say Kamala, what is it? I know her record and it's not too great. But as someone in California who is in law, can you give us your perspective?
Well, let me just start by giving Senator Harris credit for one thing I think she does deserve a lot of credit for, which is that when she was first elected district attorney, she took a very courageous stand against the death penalty. And I think that's something we should all recognize and we should give her credit for. And I think it's really a tribute to her that San Francisco to this day does not seek the death penalty in any case. But if we look at the rest of her record, if we look at her record on money bail or on immigration or on racial disparities, there's a lot less to be proud of. I'll give you a couple examples of policies that I'm really frustrated by from her time in San Francisco local law enforcement. One is that and actually one of my competitors in the race was a policy advisor to her during this time period. So this isn't just history. This is also really what's at stake in the election happening in about 100 days from today here in San Francisco. One of my main competitors was a top policy advisor to Kamala Harris at the time when Kamala Harris decided to cooperate with ICE to hand not just adults, but juveniles arrested in San Francisco over to ICE even before they'd been convicted of a crime to expedite their deportation. It's these same kinds of policies that led Kamala Harris and her team to decide that if kids don't go to school, they will prosecute their parents criminally for children choosing to skip school. A policy which we know was grossly disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities. It's these same kinds of approaches and policies that led Kamala Harris and her top team to refuse to dismiss cases that were part of the war on drugs, even when the main technician in the San Francisco crime lab who was supposed to be testing the drugs was herself using them and falsifying the drug analysis reports. And they said, it's all right, falsified evidence, it's good enough for us to keep waging this war on drugs. And it's those same folks who were committed to not just using money bail for the discriminatory purpose that we've talked about, but to increasing the amount of bail to make sure that it caught even more people up in this system of discrimination and deprivation of liberty based on wealth and poverty.
Wow. Yeah. One of the things that every single candidate I ever interview from California speaks about their concerns on for-profit prison. I know that's a big concern there, and I know she certainly hasn't been against it. What are some of the things you notice that, let's say you took the profit out of prisons. What are some of the things that you think would immediately change?
Well, I actually have clients who I represented over the years who are currently in for-profit prisons. And I know that those prisons are far less likely to have services for rehabilitation, are far less likely to be safe places for people to serve their prison time, are far less likely to have accessible visiting rooms and visiting facilities for family members and children to visit. So I think those are some of the things that we see wrong with for-profit prisons. It's that they don't have an incentive to actually provide the services that are most critical to rehabilitation, public safety, and reentry.
Right on. What do you think prison? Because what's scary is that our country imprisons more people than any other country, which is daunting. That's pretty gross. And you state that in one of your videos. What do you think would happen if the entire country just legalized cannabis and made everybody's record retroactive?
I think it's really important to do that. The history of marijuana prohibition and criminalization is one that's deeply connected with the history of racism and class oppression. Those are laws that for decades have been enforced really only against Black and brown and poor folks, not against folks, from middle class or white backgrounds. And, it's not just the fact that it's discriminatory. It's the fact that we're doing so much damage to people's lives over a plant, over something which actually has medicinal value, over something which is, when compared to so many other drugs, the harm reduction approach. I mean, I would way rather people in my community smoke marijuana than do injection meth. I would way rather they smoke marijuana than use cigarettes or alcohol in many cases. And yet we've branded people as felons. We've destroyed their lives. We've sent them to prison for life. We've made it impossible for them to raise their family or have lawful, gainful employment because of marijuana. It's a really tragic legacy of our criminal justice system, and it's one that I think we need to take decisive steps, not just in California, but across the state, to reverse as quickly as possible. It's why I'm committed to decriminalization of all drugs. I don't believe we should treat drugs through the criminal justice system. I think it's a public health crisis. Same thing with mental health. I think we need to have first responders that are trained to deal with mental health crises, with drug overdoses. And I think the context of addiction and mental illness is critical to how we approach every single criminal act.
Absolutely. Do you support sex work decriminalization?
Absolutely. Let me tell you why, because this is an important issue. A lot of folks will say, "Oh, well, we need to have enforcement of prostitution laws and sex work laws because that's how we get the traffickers." But the reality is, when traffickers can tell their victims, if you go to the police, you'll be prosecuted, that's how they keep their victims. That's how they continue to perpetrate horrific acts of sexual violence. There are many people who choose to engage in consensual sex work. And when they do that, it is not a crime, in my view. But more importantly than whether it's a crime or not, we know the crime that's more serious is the robbery and the rape and the murder of sex workers. And when sex workers cannot go to the police for fear of being prosecuted, it empowers people who want to rob and rape them to do anything with impunity. It is essential to protect sex workers, to protect all of us from violent, dangerous crime, that folks who engage in consensual sex work be free to report crimes against themselves to the police. And that will actually empower us to more effectively prosecute sex trafficking and coerced sex work.
Absolutely. Great explanation. Just scanning these. Yeah, so so one of the things I get asked a lot is, and I listen to true crime podcasts like crazy. You see a lot of memes like this too, where it'll be, a white kid like a Brock Turner, gets like a few days in prison versus, an African American boy gets like years. So how can we do anything about that, though, for judges to be consistent across the board in every state? It doesn't seem plausible.
Well, we are going to always have different systems of justice in different states. That's how our system of government was designed. We have very different sentencing guidelines from one jurisdiction to the next. I do think that, equal enforcement of the law and equal application of the law is essential to root out the racial disparities and the class disparities that lead so many folks to not use the word justice when describing this system. But I also think it's important to recognize that what's good enough for, white middle class folks, whether it be Brock Turner, whether it be juveniles who are arrested in San Francisco and beyond, should be good enough for everybody. We don't see white kids locked up in juvenile hall. We don't see it. We see them sent home to their parents because white kids, we all know, don't belong in cages. And I think we need to demand the same thing for, for kids of color. I think the same thing is true, with regard to more serious cases and adult cases, is that we should be looking for ways to hold perpetrators accountable. We should be using restorative justice whenever possible. And we should do it in a way that doesn't have anything to do with race or wealth or zip code.
Absolutely. So have you done both defense and prosecution? Both?
I have never prosecuted a criminal case, and I have filed lawsuits against ICE, for example, for illegally arresting non-citizens. I have filed lawsuits against the sheriff in San Francisco for using money bail. But, I'm proud to say that I have never used money bail to detain someone who's poor. I'm proud to say I've never prosecuted someone for sex work or for being homeless, for crimes of poverty. I'm proud to say that I have never prosecuted a non-citizen or cooperated with ICE to help them deport someone.
And the interesting thing about that, you shared about Kamala being involved in that. At the debate, she specifically said she wasn't. I mean, most of us know to just look up the receipts when she talks, but, what, as someone in California who I know they do have a lot of ICE, I hear it from my candidates all the time. What is something that you see that you're most concerned with?
Well, I see ICE agents, two things. One is I see a lot of politicians in my race, in the presidential race, who claim to be progressive, who claim to represent progressive values for the first time as politicians, who haven't lived progressive fights, who haven't lived progressive values. But when it comes time to run for office, all of a sudden they want to embrace things like bail reform, things like ending immigration raids in our community. But when they had power, when they were doing their jobs for years before their campaign, they weren't supporting those values or those policies. So that's one thing. I think it's really important that voters look not just to the rhetoric, but also to the history. What work have we done? What's our track record of commitment to these issues? Now, the second thing that I see as being really important, in San Francisco with regard to ICE and in California with regard to ICE, is that I think local law enforcement, like the district attorney's office that I'm running for, need to be the front lines of resistance to the racist, discriminatory Trump administration. What does that look like? Well, if I'm prosecuting a case and the defendant is an immigrant and ICE agents wait outside the courtroom doors and arrest that person and deport them, that is obstructing justice. That is preventing me from seeing that case to its conclusion, preventing the victim in that case from getting justice. And so I think when that happens, we need to prosecute ICE agents for obstructing justice. When ICE agents wait outside of nursery schools where Spanish-speaking parents go to pick up their kids and they arrest them simply because they're Spanish-speaking, that to me looks like child endangerment, which is a crime. That to me looks like false imprisonment, which is a crime. And we can and should prosecute those crimes.
Absolutely. I have a question from a viewer, Carrie. What's your thought on $1 million bail plea for, I think that was supposed to say Epstein, not Einstein. If the state can use the money, it makes decisions accordingly.
Yeah, the problem with money bail is that the state doesn't actually get the money. So a rich person like Epstein would actually get all of his money back at the end of the case, assuming he shows up to court. So the state doesn't get that money. The only time the state would get the money is if he skipped town and disappeared and never came back. So that's actually the exception. It's pretty rare. The problem with money bail and the way it works is most people aren't Epstein. They don't have the money to put up the full $1 million or the full $10 million or even the full 500. And so what they do is they go to a for-profit bail bond agent and they pay 10% of the money. So if your bail is $5,000, a for-profit bail bondsman will charge you $500. The bail bondsman gets their money back at the end of the case. Their profit is your $500 that you never get back. And so what we see is the bail industry actually serving as a tool to suck money and savings away from poor Black and brown communities and families and transfer that wealth, that savings, to for-profit insurance companies.
Wow. And I think one of the things as us who aren't in law that's so frustrating is every state is different when it comes to these technicalities. What do you have any particular publications or podcasts or anything that you listen to that are really informative for people like ourselves who aren't in law?
So there's the really in-depth stuff. I published the first ever 50-state survey of prison visitation policies in the Law and Policy Review a few years ago. That's available online if folks are interested in prison visitation. For podcasts that do a more general, pardon me, I'm just getting a call. Give me one moment here. folks who are interested in a more general, kind of overview of a wide range of criminal justice issues, I think there's a number of podcasts. One of them that I love is called Justice in America.
Okay, right.
And that's a good one. Another one is called The Aider and Abettor, and that's another good one. Another one is The Breakdown, Sean King's podcast. So, those are all good places for people to. I'm sorry, someone really wants to get in touch with me. Those are all good places for folks to check out podcasts and learn more about what's happening day to day across the country.
Right on. Let me see. Okay, so Bernie came out with something this time for people to be able to vote in prison. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important that people who have committed crimes be encouraged to reintegrate into society, to take their civic duty seriously. I was really happy to see Bernie take that position. I just wrote an op-ed in the Daily Journal here in San Francisco arguing that we should restore the right to vote to people on parole. But I really believe we should go further than that. I believe that, everybody who is otherwise eligible to vote should continue to have that right, whether they're in prison, on parole, probation, what have you. And the reason is simple. We want people to have a stake in the system. We want people to believe in following the law. And if they're excluded from making the laws, then they're much less likely to respect the law. Educating people while they're in prison, while they're on probation or parole about their civic duty is such a critical part of reintegration. I've seen some of the other political candidates say they disagree with Bernie on that. I've seen some of the other presidential candidates say that, when you get convicted of a crime, you lose certain rights, and one of those rights is the right to vote. But if we look at the history of disenfranchisement, if we look at the role that felony disenfranchisement has played in American history and continues to play today, we know it's not about punishment. It's not about disincentivizing people from committing crime. It's about racial discrimination. It's about systematically excluding Black and brown poor communities from participating in the political process. And it's that kind of policy which resulted in George W. Bush winning the presidential election in 2000. We need to recognize the racial discrimination built into felony disenfranchisement, and we need to empower everybody who's eligible to have their voice heard as part of this democracy.
Absolutely. I remember even a few months back, the state of Florida had to fight to even get to vote when they were out of jail.
That
makes no sense. Are there any other states who are still taking that on? Do you know?
There are lots of states that are dealing with this issue. There's only 2 states actually that currently allow people who are incarcerated to vote while they're in prison, and that's Maine and Vermont. There are states like California that currently have legislation pending. Actually, it's a proposed amendment to the state constitution that would allow people on parole to vote. Again, I think this is an issue that is getting more attention and more momentum, in part because of the critical role it plays in determining the outcome of elections, as happened in 2000 and probably happened in some of the swing states in 2016 as well.
Right. Absolutely. We have a question from Angelique. What about the people that are in immigration court without physical translators or a lawyer that they have no idea what's being said?
It's a huge problem. We have people as young as 2 years old in immigration court, not speaking the language, not represented by counsel. And, our government is basically saying, well, they can defend themselves. Many of these people may have valid, legitimate claims to stay in the country legally, whether because of a parent who's a citizen or because of a reasonable fear, a credible fear of persecution or torture if they're returned to their home country. But they're not given the tools or the voice or the translators or the lawyers necessary to make that case. It's unacceptable. It undermines our country's commitment to the 1951 Refugee Convention, to the Convention Against Torture. And I think it's making us a national disgrace. It's doing tremendous damage to the post-World War II global consensus that was built precisely to try and protect people who are most vulnerable from persecution.
Absolutely. Um, I just saw something else I wanted to touch on. Where to go? Um, um, People asking about Trump, not really that interesting to me. I'm sure you get asked about Trump all the time. Like, should he be in jail? Should he be impeached? Like, I mean, what is your take on that?
You know, at the end of the day, the most important thing is getting him out of office as quickly as possible. And I don't know that impeaching him is an effective way to do that, given the complicity of the Republican Senate in all of his crimes. Not all, but most. My concern is that impeachment could take a tremendous amount of political capital, could be a big distraction from focusing voters on the crimes that are being committed. I think, has he done things that are impeachable? Absolutely. But is impeachment an effective political tool in this moment? I'm not so sure.
Absolutely agree. Um, Let me see what else we've got. Someone talking about plea bargaining. Same thing. You're kind of being coerced to admit something.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. Some plea bargaining is a really important part of a just criminal justice system. But then lots of other pleas are, in fact, coercive. So I'll give you an example. I've represented clients charged with misdemeanors, low level offenses, who are too poor to pay bail. And they're desperate to get back to their jobs and their families. They come to court, and the judge says, if you want to maintain your innocence, if you want to exercise your constitutional rights, then you have to wait in jail for a month or longer to get in front of a jury, to have your case heard. But if you want to plead guilty, you can go home today. I think that kind of get out of jail today, if you waive your rights, plea bargaining strategy from judges and from prosecutors is absolutely coercive. I think when people are given the option to plead guilty to avoid the risk of a more serious punishment or a more serious conviction, it's not always coercive, as long as it's done in good faith with transparency in the discovery, where the defendant knows what the evidence is against him or her.
Right on. Now, how many people are you running against in this primary?
It's not a primary. It's a ranked choice election. Yeah, so let me fill you.
Right.
So San Francisco uses ranked choice voting. That means we don't have a primary, we don't have a runoff. November 5th of this year, about 112 days from now, is when San Francisco voters go to the polls and when they'll decide which of us they want to be their district attorney. It's a four-way race. There's no incumbent in the race. It's the first time in over 100 years when no one within the district attorney's office is running for district attorney. And I'm actually the only candidate in this race who currently works in the criminal court at all.
Really? So yeah. What do the other three do?
Well, one of them is a district attorney, but in a different county. One of them is legal counsel to the sheriff, and one of them works for the attorney general.
Oh, I see. So do you think that first of all, are you guys going to have a debate?
We are going to have a bunch of debates. Our first one is coming up July 29th.
Awesome. Are you prepared for that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting prepared. I like to say that I've been prepared for it my whole life because I've lived the criminal justice system. It's been my whole life, personally and professionally. But of course, a debate is a very specific format, and it requires trying to communicate a lot of complicated messages to your audience in a very short period of time. So we're working on it. I'm excited for the debate. I wish we had more of them, frankly. I think there's nothing better than to get voters excited by seeing all the candidates side by side, getting to compare who's got the best ideas and who's really going to follow through and deliver on those ideas.
Absolutely. And I digress, but just as a true crime fan, can you explain more in depth what an Alford plea is?
Sure. An Alford plea is basically a plea where a defendant says, I'm going to plead guilty, but I'm also going to assert my innocence. And it's a specific kind of plea that Alford is the name of a case that says that it's an acceptable thing for judges to do. Ordinarily, ordinarily a judge would not be able to accept a plea from someone who says I'm innocent. But an Alford plea is a mechanism that allows someone who's facing, say, life in prison to avoid that risk, to not go to trial, to plead guilty to maybe a lesser charge or a lesser sentence, but still maintain their innocence.
Wow, that's so fascinating. It's very fascinating how that can happen. That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you support a federal job guarantee?
Well, it's a little beyond my purview as a local district attorney. I absolutely think there's an important role for the federal government to play in helping to maintain employment levels across the country, to help avoid folks from being indigent on the streets and poor. And I think having the federal government provide jobs is a really great way to do that. And we know that the resources are there. It's just a question of how we allocate them. So, for example, in California, we are currently spending more than 10% of our state budget. That's over $20 billion on the prison system. And I think that money would go a lot further in creating jobs before people commit crimes, rather than waiting for them to do harm, having victims get harmed and suffer, and then destroying families, through mass incarceration.
Right. And the reason I bring it up is because with a federal job guarantee, it wouldn't matter if you have a criminal history. Like, you'd get out of jail and literally get a job.
It's so important that people coming home from prison have something to do, that they have identification, that they have a place to sleep. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we know what's going to happen. The 2/3 recidivism rates that we see across the country today.
Absolutely. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you would like to share?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm so appreciative of you having me on, of the question that the viewers had, and I'm happy to come back anytime. I hope folks will get involved in the campaign, find ways to donate, to volunteer, to get the word out, because this is a grassroots campaign, and we're really trying to transform California and the whole country's approach to criminal justice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys are on Twitter, please follow. Anyone in San Francisco area that please send this interview. Just, do whatever, you guys can to get these candidates elected, because bitching about it on social media is just not enough. So thank you guys for watching. Tuesday, I have Congressman Ro Khanna coming back for the 4th time. So I'm excited because now he's Bernie's co-chair. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to discuss. But again, thank you for tuning in. I have a candidate Thursday. I'm not sure which one we're scheduling. So I'll be back Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern. But anyway, thank you again so much for joining us, and best of luck in your race. I think you're going to nail it, and I really want to see that debate.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we'll keep you posted. Tune in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care, guys.